Fire consumed the forest as night screamed with tracer rounds carving paths through smoke. Rain hammered the canopy in sheets, turning earth to mud and blood to rust-colored streams. Lieutenant Sarah Kane pressed her face into the wet ground, breathing shallow, counting heartbeats between explosions. The ambush had come at 2,200 hours. 6 operators, now 5 bodies cooling in the undergrowth. Sarah's hands found her rifle by muscle memory. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system felt heavier than usual, or perhaps that was just exhaustion speaking. Her ghillie suit clung to her frame, soaked through. The burlap and netting transformed into a second skin of vegetation and filth. 30 meters ahead, voices, not English. The dialect was regional, clipped and efficient. Professional soldiers, not militia. That made this worse. Someone had known their insertion point, someone had sold them out. She closed her eyes and listened. 4 distinct voices, 2 moving left, flanking pattern, 2 holding center, standard search formation. They expected survivors to run, to panic, to give themselves away with movement or sound. Sarah did none of those things. Her breath synchronized with the rainfall. In through the nose, counting to 4, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. The technique steadied her pulse, slowed her nervous system, made her body disappear into the environment. Ghost breathing, the skill that had earned her the call sign. Thunder rolled across the valley. In that moment of natural chaos, she moved 3 feet forward, sliding on her stomach like a serpent, using the noise to mask the rustle of fabric and vegetation. When the thunder faded, she became stone again. The voices grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the mist, sweeping in mechanical arcs. They were being thorough. These weren't soldiers playing at war. These were hunters who understood their prey. Sarah's fingers traced the stock of her rifle. Custom modifications, match-grade barrel, Schmidt and Bender scope with night vision capability. 20 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 21 chances to survive until dawn. She thought of Captain Daniel Foster, her team leader, the man who had thrown himself on a grenade that never exploded, buying her 3 seconds to roll into the ravine. 3 seconds that had meant the difference between life and joining him in whatever came after. His last words echoed in her memory. "Make it count, Ghost." The flashlights moved past her position. Sarah exhaled slowly, tasting copper and earth. She was invisible. She was patient. She was the night itself, watching and waiting. One of the soldiers spoke into a radio. The transmission crackled with static, but his words were clear enough. "Zone 3 clear. No bodies recovered. Continuing sweep." A voice responded from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Confirmed. Zone 2 reports movement. Converging on coordinates." Sarah's jaw tightened. They were coordinated. Multiple teams working in concert, communicating efficiently, adapting to the terrain. This wasn't some rushed operation. This was planned, rehearsed. She reached for her own radio, still clipped to her vest. Smashed. The fall into the ravine had destroyed it. She was deaf to friendly forces, cut off from extraction, alone in hostile territory with an unknown number of enemy combatants between her and safety. The math was simple and brutal. Stay here and die when they swept back through. Move and risk detection. Fight and burn through ammunition she couldn't replace. Or become the predator. Sarah shifted her weight, feeling the mud squelch beneath her elbows. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, picking out shapes and shadows. The forest was dense here. Triple canopy jungle that blocked out starlight. Perfect conditions for what she did best. She began to move again, not away from the enemy but parallel to their search pattern. Stalking. Her training took over, years of selection and preparation condensing into pure instinct. Every motion was calculated. Every breath was measured. Every sound was cataloged and assessed. The rain intensified. Good. Rain was her ally. Rain covered sound, washed away scent, reduced visibility. Rain made soldiers uncomfortable and careless. Ahead, she spotted a checkpoint. 3 soldiers, smoking beneath a tarp strung between trees. Their weapons leaned against the trunk, within reach but not in hand. Overconfident, they believed the fight was over. Sarah counted their mistakes. No perimeter security, no proper light discipline. Clustered together instead of maintaining spacing. Their body language was relaxed, casual even. They thought they were hunting ghosts. They had no idea the ghost was hunting them. Sarah circled the checkpoint, moving through the undergrowth with patience that bordered on meditative. 200 meters, then 300, until their voices faded into the white noise of rain and wind. She found higher ground, a small ridge overlooking a clearing where enemy forces were consolidating. Through her scope, she counted 16 soldiers. 2 technical vehicles, heavy machine guns mounted in the beds, a command tent with radio antennas bristling from the roof. This was the staging area. The nerve center. Sarah pulled out her waterproof notebook, sketching the layout by feel, guard positions, fields of fire, dead zones where shadows accumulated. She worked methodically, building a mental map of the tactical situation. A radio transmission crackled from one of the vehicles. She couldn't hear the words, but the tone was clear. Frustration, confusion, then, louder. A voice speaking into a handheld. Sector 4 is quiet, too quiet, something is wrong. Another voice responded. Check your equipment. Could be a malfunction. Negative. Zhang and his team missed their last 2 check-ins. Silence on the radio. Then, send reconnaissance, now. Sarah watched through her scope as 4 soldiers broke away from the main group, moving with weapons raised into the forest she had just vacated. They would find the checkpoint. They would find 3 bodies with neat holes in their skulls, killed so quietly their companions 20 meters away had heard nothing. Except Sarah hadn't killed anyone yet. The confusion was the point. She had moved equipment, repositioned rifles, left false trails heading in opposite directions, created the impression of multiple operators working in coordination. Let them imagine a force that didn't exist. Psychological warfare. Make them afraid of shadows. The radio chatter increased in volume and frequency. She picked up fragments through the weather and distance. Tracks leading east. Blood trail, no body. Impossible for one person. Who is hunting us? That last question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah smiled without humor. They were asking the wrong question. It wasn't who. It was what. The night, the rain, the silence between heartbeats. These were her weapons, more lethal than any rifle. She memorized the guard rotation patterns, 20-minute intervals. The sentries moved in pairs, sweeping the perimeter with flashlights and thermal imagers. Professional, but predictable. Predictability was a fatal flaw. Sarah withdrew from her observation post, moving deeper into the forest. She needed supplies. Water, food, ammunition if possible. The enemy had all 3 in abundance. She found what she was looking for an hour before dawn. A supply cache, poorly concealed beneath a camouflage net. 2 guards, both facing outward, watching for threats from the forest rather than from within their own perimeter. Sarah approached from behind, low and slow. The mud helped, muffling her footfalls. She counted steps, controlled breathing. The first guard never heard her. The second turned just as her knife found his throat. No sound, just the rustle of fabric as bodies settled into the earth. She worked quickly, stripping the guards of ammunition, rations, and a functioning radio. The voices that came through the speaker were tense now, edged with something approaching panic. Command, we have confirmed losses. 5 men down. Identification? Negative. Bodies are. They're positioned. Arranged. Sarah hadn't arranged any bodies. But she didn't correct the misconception. Fear was contagious. Let it spread. She clipped the radio to her vest and continued moving, always staying ahead of the sweep teams, always leaving traces that suggested phantom operatives who dissolved into mist. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the canopy like smoke. Sarah found shelter in a hollow tree, wide enough to conceal her body, high enough to provide good visibility. She allowed herself to rest, not sleep, never sleep, but rest. Her muscles ached, her hands shook from adrenaline crash. Her mind wanted to drift, so she anchored it with memory. Captain Daniel Foster, 34 years old. Boston accent that got thicker when he was angry or drunk. Had a daughter named Emma who sent him crayon drawings that he kept folded in his helmet. Foster had been the one to recruit Sarah into the team. "You shoot like God has a personal grudge," he'd said after watching her qualify. "That's either terrifying or exactly what we need. I'm hoping for the second one." She remembered the insertion brief. 6 operators, 12-hour reconnaissance mission. Locate the enemy command structure, report coordinates, extract before sunrise. Simple, clean, then the ambush. Claymores buried along the trail, perfectly positioned. Someone had known their route, known their timing, known everything. Lieutenant Marcus Webb had died in the first 3 seconds, shredded by ball bearings and high explosive. Petty Officer James Chen had taken rounds through the chest trying to return fire. Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Rodriguez had bled out while Sarah applied pressure to wounds that wouldn't stop leaking. Foster had held the line while Sarah dragged Rodriguez toward cover. He'd fired until his rifle ran dry, then switched to his sidearm, then to his knife. He'd bought them time measured in heartbeats, and then the grenade. Sarah had seen it land, seen Foster's eyes widen with recognition, seen him make the calculation faster than thought. Die here, or die protecting someone else. He'd chosen protection. The grenade had been a dud. Some cosmic joke. But Foster hadn't known that when he'd covered it with his body. And the enemy hadn't known that when they'd fired 40 rounds into his back. Sarah touched the dog tags hanging beneath her uniform. 5 sets. She'd collected them all before running, refusing to leave her team as nameless casualties in a foreign jungle. Make it count, Foster had said. She intended to. The radio crackled with another transmission. All teams, report status. One by one, voices responded. Sarah listened, building a picture of enemy disposition. They were consolidating, pulling back toward their base camp. Defensive posture. They'd lost the initiative. Good. She checked her rifle, cleaned the mud from the action, verified the scope alignment, loaded a fresh magazine, 20 rounds. She would make every single one count. The rain returned with nightfall, heavier than before. Sarah moved through it like a shadow given form, circling toward the enemy base camp from the north. The direction they wouldn't expect, because it required crossing a river swollen with runoff. She crossed at midnight, using a fallen tree as a bridge. The current churned below, hungry and dark. One slip would mean drowning, crushed against rocks, or swept downstream into enemy patrols. Sarah didn't slip. On the far bank, she oriented herself by compass and began the final approach. The base camp was ahead, lights visible through the trees. Voices carried on the wind, nervous and sharp. She found her position 400 meters from the perimeter, a rocky outcrop with good angles and multiple escape routes. She settled in, wrapping herself in vegetation, becoming part of the landscape. Through her scope, the camp revealed itself. 40 soldiers visible, more in the tents, heavy weapons positions, communication equipment, all the machinery of organized violence. Sarah selected her first target, a soldier standing near the generator, smoking a cigarette, rifle slung over his shoulder, alone, isolated. Perfect. She adjusted for wind, for distance, for the slight downward angle. Her breathing slowed to nothing. Her heartbeat became a metronome. The world compressed to the small circle of light in her scope. The trigger broke clean. The suppressor reduced the sound to a sharp cough, lost in the rain. 400 meters away, the soldier collapsed. No one noticed immediately. He'd simply folded up and disappeared from sight. Sarah cycled the bolt. Second target, a guard on patrol, walking the perimeter. Same calculations, same cold precision. The guard crumpled mid-step. Now voices raised in alarm. Flashlights swept the area around the fallen men. Soldiers rushed from tents, weapons ready, shouting orders. Sarah picked off 3 more before they understood what was happening. Each shot separated by 30 seconds, each targeting someone who broke from cover or moved predictably. Chaos bloomed. They fired into the forest, full automatic bursts that shredded vegetation and accomplished nothing. They couldn't see her, couldn't locate her, couldn't fight what they couldn't find. A voice screamed over the radio. We're being hunted. Multiple shooters. Request immediate backup. Sarah whispered to herself, not multiple, just me. She relocated. 200 meters east, different angle, different firing position. The enemy was still searching her old position, wasting ammunition on shadows. More targets, more shots, each one deliberate, each one creating maximum psychological impact. They stopped moving in the open, started using cover, started thinking defensively. Good. Defensive soldiers were static soldiers. Static soldiers were predictable. Sarah became a ghost in the rain, appearing and vanishing, each appearance marked by death delivered from impossible distances. Sarah's hands were steady as she loaded her 7th magazine. 19 rounds expended, 19 men down. The mathematics of survival written in brass casings and blood. She allowed herself 30 seconds of stillness. In that pause, her mother's voice surfaced from memory. When you're afraid, baby girl, you pray. You put your fear in God's hands and you keep moving forward. Margaret Kane had been a nurse, had spent 30 years in emergency rooms, seeing the worst humanity could offer. She taught Sarah that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite terror clawing at your throat. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered, Lord, if you're listening, I'm sorry for what I'm about to do, But they killed my brothers, my sisters, and if I don't make it home, please let someone tell Emma that her daddy was brave. The prayer felt inadequate, selfish even, but it anchored her, reminded her that she was still human beneath the mud and violence. She opened her eyes. Movement ahead. 3 soldiers advancing through the undergrowth, using night vision and thermal imagers. They were close, too close. Sarah controlled her breathing, watching them through gaps in the vegetation. 15 meters, 10, 5. They passed within arm's reach, so close she could smell gun oil and sweat. One of them stopped, raising his fist in the universal signal for halt. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. His companion tilted his head, listening. "Hear what?" "Nothing. That's the problem. No insects, no animals. The forest is dead quiet." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. They were smart, observant, dangerous. The first soldier keyed his radio. "Command, this sector is wrong. Wildlife has fled. Either there's a predator nearby or—" Sarah moved. Her knife found the speaker's throat before he could finish the transmission. She twisted, drove her elbow into the second soldier's temple, felt bone crack beneath the impact. The third raised his rifle, but she was already inside his guard, deflecting the barrel upward as it discharged into the canopy. 3 seconds, 3 bodies, complete silence except for the rain. Sarah retrieved her knife, wiped the blade on dead man's uniform, took his radio, his ammunition, his rations. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath didn't quicken. She had become something beyond soldier, beyond human. She had become necessary. Sarah moved through the forest like water flowing downhill, following paths of least resistance, always seeking the next position of advantage. The enemy had adapted to her tactics, clustering in groups of 5 or more, never allowing isolation. So she adapted in turn. 2 kilometers south of the main camp, she found what she was looking for: a prisoner. An American pilot, arms bound, guarded by 4 soldiers in a hastily constructed shelter. The pilot's flight suit identified him as Captain Robert Hayes, Navy. His face was swollen, one eye closed from impact damage. But he was alive, conscious. Sarah studied the situation. 4 guards, alert, weapons ready. No easy approach. She waited 3 hours, motionless in the undergrowth, watching their patterns. Guards rotated every 30 minutes. During the rotation, there was a 14-second window when only 3 guards were fully alert. 14 seconds. Enough. The next rotation came at 0400 hours. Sarah moved during the confusion of changing shifts, coming in low from the blind side. Her knife took the first guard silently, the second turned just as her rifle butt connected with his jaw, the third managed to raise his weapon. Sarah shot him through the chest, the suppressed round punching through Kevlar and lung tissue. The fourth ran. Sarah let him go. Ran meant radio transmission. Radio transmission meant confusion and false information. Let them think she was kilometers away while she worked right under their noses. She cut Hayes' bonds. His eyes widened in recognition not of her face, but of what she represented: rescue, hope. "Can you move?" Sarah whispered. Hayes nodded, working feeling back into his wrists. "Stay low. Follow exactly where I step. Make no sound. Understand?" Another nod. They moved together through the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah leading, Hayes following in her footsteps. She could hear him struggling to match her silence, his breathing too loud, his movements too heavy, but he tried. That mattered. 200 meters from the shelter, Sarah stopped. Voices ahead. A patrol, moving perpendicular to their position. She guided Hayes into cover, pressed a finger to his lips. They waited while 6 soldiers passed within 20 meters, flashlights cutting through the mist. When the patrol vanished, Hayes whispered, "How many of you are there?" Sarah met his eyes. "Just me." "Bullshit. I've been listening to their radio chatter. They think they're fighting a whole platoon." "Good. Let them keep thinking that." They continued moving, navigating by compass and memory. Sarah's mental map was complete now, every trail and checkpoint memorized. Hayes spoke again. "The rest of your team, dead." "I'm sorry." Sarah said nothing. Sorry was a word for people who had the luxury of grief. She had only purpose. They reached a cache point. Sarah had prepared earlier stolen supplies, ammunition, a backup radio. She verified the radio's encryption, then keyed the emergency frequency. "Any station, this is Sierra 2-1. Requesting immediate extraction. 1 friendly, 1 rescued prisoner, multiple hostiles. Grid coordinates follow. Static." Then a voice, professional and crisp. "Sierra 2-1, this is Griffon. Actual. Confirm authentication. Sarah recited her security codes, confirmed Hayes' identity, and transmitted their location. Extraction authorized. Griffon Actual responded. Helos inbound. ETA 90 minutes. Be advised, intel suggests your mission was compromised from the outset. Trust no local assets. The transmission ended. Sarah looked at Hayes. You heard that? Yeah. Someone sold us out. Not just us. My whole team. She thought of Foster, of his last words, of Emma's crayon drawings. Then we make them pay, Hayes said quietly. Sarah checked her rifle. 12 rounds remaining. That's the plan. The enemy adapted again. Sarah watched through her scope as they deployed thermal imaging equipment, sophisticated military-grade sensors that could detect body heat through vegetation and weather. Hayes crouched beside her in the muddy depression they'd claimed as their final defensive position. How long until extraction? 40 minutes. They're going to find us. Yes. Hayes checked the rifle Sarah had given him. An AK-47 taken from a dead soldier, 9 magazines, 270 rounds. What's the plan? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was calculating angles, distances, probabilities. The thermal sensors were sophisticated but not perfect. They had limitations. Body temperature is 98.6 degrees, she said. Mud is much cooler. We're going to disappear. She stripped off her uniform jacket, her boots. Hayes stared at her. You're serious? Completely. They covered themselves in mud, thick layers that caked over skin and equipment. The cold was immediate and brutal, sucking warmth from their bodies. But it worked. Through the thermal scope she'd stolen, Sarah confirmed that their heat signatures had diminished to almost nothing. Now we wait underwater, she said. The depression they occupied was actually a flooded crater, 3 feet deep, water the temperature of melted ice. Sarah submerged first, using a reed as a breathing tube, keeping only her eyes above the waterline. Hayes followed her example, his face pale with cold and fear. Enemy soldiers swept through their position 20 minutes later. Sarah watched their boots splash past, inches from her face. They were thorough, checking every hiding spot, scanning with thermal imagers. The sensors showed nothing, just cold water and colder mud. The patrol moved on. Sarah counted to 1,000 before emerging. Her body had gone numb, fingers stiff and clumsy. Hayes was shaking violently, hypothermia setting in. She pulled him from the water, wrapped him in a thermal blanket from her pack. Stay awake, extraction is close. The radio crackled. Sierra 2-1, this is Griffon, Actual. 5 minutes out, mark your position. Sarah activated an infrared strobe, visible only to the incoming helicopters. The forest around her exploded with activity as the enemy realized their prey was escaping. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions. Sarah returned fire, controlled bursts, buying seconds. Hayes joined her, his rifle chattering on full automatic. Then the sound that changed everything. Helicopter rotors, growing louder, the deep thump of military-grade engines. 2 Black Hawks swept over the tree line, door gunners opening up with devastating accuracy. The enemy advance faltered, broke, retreated into cover. Fast ropes dropped. Sarah grabbed one, wrapped her legs around it, began the descent into the helicopter bay. Hayes followed, slower, weaker. A final enemy soldier emerged from the forest, raising an RPG launcher. Sarah saw it happening in slow motion, knew she couldn't reach her rifle in time. Hayes shot him. 3 rounds. Center mass. The RPG detonated harmlessly in the undergrowth. They hauled themselves into the helicopter. The crew chief grabbed Sarah's harness, pulling her inside. The Black Hawks climbed hard, banking away from the forest as tracer rounds chased them into the sky. Sarah collapsed against the bulkhead, exhausted beyond measure. Hayes sat across from her, still shaking from cold and adrenaline. The crew chief pressed a headset over her ears. Sierra 2-1, you are one crazy operator. Intel said you were Kia. Sarah keyed the microphone. They were wrong. Yeah, we're getting that now. Enemy radio chatter is going insane. They think they've been fighting a ghost. She looked out the open door at the jungle receding below. Somewhere down there, Foster and the others remained. She'd marked their position, transmitted the coordinates. Recovery teams would bring them home. Not a ghost, Sarah said quietly. Just someone who remembered how to hunt. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. Sarah sat in a sterile room while intelligence officers asked the same questions in different configurations, trying to map how one operator had survived when 5 had died. She told them about the ambush, the compromise, the fighting withdrawal. But she left out the parts that mattered. The parts about becoming something other than human, about learning to breathe with the rain and move with the shadows. They showed her photographs of the enemy casualties. 19 confirmed kills, 6 wounded, 12 missing, presumed casualties unreported. How? The lead interrogator asked. Sarah met his eyes. Training, luck, anger. Anger doesn't account for this level of tactical precision. Then call it will to survive. They couldn't argue with that. Survival was the oldest motivation in human history. When they finally released her, Sarah found Hayes waiting in the corridor. His face was clean now, the swelling reduced, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen the edge of the abyss. They asked me what happened out there, he said. What did you tell them? The truth. That you hunted them like animals. That you made them afraid of the dark. That you turned the jungle into your weapon. Sarah said nothing. Hayes continued, I've been flying for 12 years. I've seen combat. But what you did out there, that wasn't combat. That was art. Terrible, beautiful art. It was survival. No. Survival is hiding until rescue. What you did was revenge. Sarah couldn't deny it. Foster deserved revenge. They all did. Thank you, Hayes said, for coming back for me. It's what we do. We don't leave people behind. He nodded, understanding the depth of that statement. Then he saluted crisp, formal, sincere. Sarah returned it. Hayes left. Sarah stood alone in the corridor, feeling the weight of Foster's dog tags against her chest. She'd made it count, just as he'd asked, but the cost was written on her soul in letters of fire and blood. Sarah spent 3 days in medical evaluation. Physically, she was intact, dehydrated, hypothermic, malnourished, but alive. The doctors cleared her with the caveat that she needed rest and therapy. She ignored both recommendations. On the 4th day, she returned to the operations center and demanded to see the mission files. The commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Brennan, initially refused. You need time to process what happened, Lieutenant. I need answers, Sarah said. Someone compromised our mission. Someone killed my team. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Close the door. Sarah did. Brennan pulled up classified files on her computer, turning the screen so Sarah could see. This stays between us, Brennan said. Officially, your team was hit by random enemy patrol. Bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. Unofficially? Unofficially, we have evidence that someone in our command structure provided your insertion coordinates to enemy intelligence. The ambush was deliberate, targeted. Sarah's hands curled into fists. Who? We don't know yet. The investigation is ongoing. But whoever it is, they have high-level access. They knew your routes, your protocols, everything. So they can do it again. Yes. Sarah absorbed this information. Somewhere in the chain of command, a traitor was operating. Someone who'd traded American lives for money or ideology or whatever motivated people to betray their own. What happens now? She asked. Now you go on leave. You don't discuss this with anyone. You let us handle the investigation. And if I refuse? Brennan's expression hardened. Then I make it an order. You've done enough, Lieutenant. More than enough. Go home. Heal. Let us finish this. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to hunt the traitor the way she'd hunted enemy soldiers through the jungle. But Brennan was right. She was exhausted, hollowed out, running on fumes in fury. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? Granted. When you find whoever did this, I want to be there. I want to look them in the eye and ask them if it was worth it. If 5 good people dying was worth whatever they got paid. Brennan nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. Sarah left the operations center and walked across the base toward her barracks. The afternoon sun felt alien after days in the jungle darkness. The clean air tasted wrong without mud and gunpowder. She thought about Foster's daughter, Emma, who would never see her father again, who would grow up with only photographs and stories to remember him by. Sarah had survived. But the price of survival was carrying the weight of those who hadn't. It was knowing that luck and skill had separated her from oblivion by the thinnest of margins. It was understanding that she would never sleep soundly again. 30 days later, Sarah stood on a hillside overlooking Arlington National Cemetery. The funeral for Captain Daniel Foster had concluded an hour ago, but she remained, watching the rows of white headstones stretch toward the horizon. Emma Foster had been there, holding her mother's hand, wearing a black dress that made her look impossibly small. She hadn't cried during the ceremony. She'd simply stared at the flag-draped coffin with eyes too old for her face. Sarah had stayed back, watching from a distance. She had no right to intrude on private grief. She'd said her goodbyes in the jungle, when she'd marked Foster's position, and promised to make his death meaningful. A voice spoke behind her. "You're Lieutenant Kane." Sarah turned. A woman in her 60s, wearing a simple black dress. Foster's mother. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. "My son wrote letters. The last one mentioned you. Said you were the best sniper he'd ever seen. Said if anything happened to him, you'd make it right." Sarah's throat tightened. "I tried." Foster's mother studied her with eyes that had seen too many military funerals, buried too many family members. "Daniel always believed in justice, not revenge. There's a difference." "I know. Do you? Because from what I understand, you killed a lot of people out there. And I need to know if my son died for justice or for your revenge." The question was fair. Sarah had asked herself the same thing 100 times. "I killed people who were trying to kill me," she said carefully. "I hunted people who had murdered my team. If that's revenge, then yes. But I'd like to think it was also making sure they couldn't do it to anyone else." Foster's mother nodded slowly. "That's justice then. The kind that costs something." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "This is for you. Daniel wrote it 3 weeks before he died. He had a feeling that mission was wrong, that something was off. He wanted you to have this if he didn't come back." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. Foster's handwriting on the front. "Ghost." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Foster's mother touched her shoulder briefly. "He was proud of you. Whatever happens next, remember that." She walked away, leaving Sarah alone on the hillside with the letter. Sarah opened it carefully. Foster's handwriting was precise, military neat. "Ghost, if you're reading this, I screwed up and got myself killed. Sorry about that. I know you'll blame yourself. You'll think you should have been faster, smarter, better. Don't. That's an order. Whatever happened, you survived for a reason. Maybe to tell our story. Maybe to find out who betrayed us. Maybe just to keep being you, the quiet professional who gets the job done. Take care of my girls if you can. Emma and Sarah. Yes, we gave her your name. Make sure they know their daddy was trying to do the right thing. And Ghost, don't let this break you. The world needs good people who know how to fight, but don't become the thing you're fighting. Promise me that. Your team leader and friend, Foster." Sarah folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. The sun was setting, painting the cemetery in shades of gold and shadow. She thought about Foster's final request. About not becoming the thing she fought. About staying human in a profession that encouraged inhumanity. It was the hardest order he'd ever given her. But Sarah Kane was good at hard things. Good at impossible odds. Good at surviving when survival seemed impossible. She pulled out her phone and dialed Colonel Brennan's number. "This is Lieutenant Kane," she said when Brennan answered. "I'm ready to come back. And when you find who betrayed my team, I want to be there. Not for revenge. For justice." "Understood," Brennan said. "Welcome back, Ghost." Sarah ended the call and turned away from the cemetery. Behind her, the sun dropped below the horizon, and darkness spread across the landscape like ink in water. She had survived the jungle, survived the hunters, survived becoming the thing she'd needed to be in order to make it home. Now came the harder part, surviving herself. The radio transcript from that mission had become legend in intelligence circles. The enemy's final transmission, sent from a surviving commander. "She wasn't hunting us, the night was." They'd been wrong. The night wasn't hunting anyone. But Sarah Kane had learned to wear the darkness like a weapon, to make the shadows her allies, to become the ghost that whispered through enemy lines, leaving only silence in her wake. She'd learned that survival wasn't always about living through the battle. Sometimes it was about carrying forward the memory of those who didn't, about making their sacrifice count, about transforming grief into purpose and loss into determination. Sarah walked away from the cemetery as night descended. Somewhere ahead, answers waited, justice waited, the truth about betrayal and blood. But for now, she was simply Lieutenant Sarah Kane, Navy SEAL, call sign Ghost Whisper. A survivor with debts to repay and promises to keep. The night wasn't hunting anyone, but she was,